Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Ed Zschau, and I'm delighted that you're here to join Tim Ferriss, class of 2000, class of 1961, to this event, which is part of the Keller Center Speaker Series on entrepreneurship. I want to take you back to a personal experience in February of 2000. I got an email from a student, a Princeton student, who had been overseas during the fall semester, coming back to finish up his Princeton experience in the spring semester of 2000. And he knew that my course, High-Tech Entrepreneurship, is by application only. So, and applications are due in November. But here it was February, and he hadn't applied. I read the email, and it was touching. He said, I'll do anything to enroll in your class. I'll clean the blackboards. I'll clean the erasers. And I knew that I had an entrepreneur on my hands. Tim Ferriss has had a great ride over the past 13 years since he graduated from Princeton. And I know a lot of you have read his books. He's now the author of 3 best-selling books, all based on 4 hours. The 4-hour Workweek, the 4-hour Body, the 4-hour Chef. However, this afternoon will not be 4 hours. It will be somewhat shorter than that. And the format will be that I'm going to ask my former student, about which I'm very proud, and I should share with you that he spoke to my current students this afternoon in class just as he's done for years. He's come back to Princeton and shared his experiences. So I've had the chance to see the story unfold year by year, semester by semester. But what I'm going to inquire with Tim about in, let's say, the first 20 minutes or so is more about not what he's done, but how he did it. Get behind the story. And then turn the session over to all of you to follow up with any questions you might have of Tim. So let me start, Tim, by asking you, what was the path from graduation? I was with you and your parents on class day in 2000, to starting your first company, which was Brain Quicken, a performance supplements company.
I just have to take a quick sidebar to say I thought the erasers was a very nice touch in my email. Couldn't just be the blackboard. So the initial path from graduation to starting my own company was not a straight line. If I had tried to plan it, it wouldn't have turned out. I was very influenced, awestruck probably is a better term, by a guest speaker that you had in your own class, Tom Isakovich, who seemed like a younger incarnation of Steve Jobs to me. He was really masterful at controlling the room and delivering presentations. So I ended up working for TrueSand Networks, which was a storage area networking company. So think mass data storage, which then meant $1 million systems that were 10 terabytes or something like that. And it took 32 emails of various types after writing the class project on his company to finally get a job. And I'll just give one anecdote related to that. Most of them were helpful news. You might need this job candidate for this position I know you're hiring for, because he clearly wasn't hiring for me. And I said, well, as it turns out, this is my Hail Mary email, which was now 2 or 3 months post-graduation, sitting at home. I'm going to be in San Jose next week anyway. It would really be nice to at least thank you and the team for spending so much time with me, and I have a couple of pieces that didn't make it into the paper that were related to competitive analysis that you might find helpful with network appliance and EMC and so forth and so on. And he's like, I'd love to, I can't, I'm sorry. Like, So I thought I was going to have to move on, but he had a change of heart, and he said, I can meet you from something like 1 to 1:15 on Tuesday. All right, it's something. We're making progress. And the reality was I had no plans to be in San Jose at all. So I took the small amount of cash that I had at the time, bought a standby ticket, which meant I couldn't check luggage. So I wore my ill-fitting suit, which I got from God knows where, and backpack, headed to San Jose, and ended up staying in San Francisco where I couldn't afford a hotel, so I slept on the second floor of Fairtex Kickboxing. It was a Muay Thai kickboxing gym on Clementina Street, right next to 6th, which is not a nice area at all. But I met up with Tom, and he said, you're not going to bother me, and you're not going to stop bothering me, until I give you a job. Is that roughly right? And I said, yes. And he said, you're in sales. So that started my first startup experience, which was wonderful. I came in at employee, I think it was 12 or 13. We grew up to well over 100. And when things went sour, keeping in mind that this was starting in 2000, right? When everything started imploding, I soon found myself out of a job, or I at least saw the writing on the wall that people were getting fired. I was probably going to go pretty soon, along with my entire outside sales division. So I started to wonder, just really fantasize and daydream about what type of company I could start based on everything that I'd learned being in the room with Tom, seeing deals getting struck, seeing partnerships being forged. And I just looked at my own spending habits. So I looked at, as a percentage of my income, I was making $40,000 base, and no commissions to be seen because of the company going under, of course. And I spent $300 to $400 a month on sports nutrition products. And while at Princeton undergrad, I had actually initially aimed to be within the psychology department, focusing on neuroscience. So I took the late Bart Hobel's class, which was fantastic. I wanted to work in Barry Jacobs' lab for a host of reasons. But I couldn't handle the perfusing of rats, as it's called. So that's the euthanizing of rats, which actually is very humanely done. I just couldn't do it. And I transferred to the East Asian Studies department. But from that neuroscience start, and having at that point competed in everything from judo to kickboxing, very competitively on a national level later, I turned my dorm room at Forbes into what appeared to be a meth lab, and it wasn't a meth lab. And I decided not to do that past a certain point, lest the authorities find it unsavory, making products for myself based on this very rudimentary understanding of how some of the neurotransmitters that mediate performance work. So I decided to start making cold calls, because after all, that's what I've been practicing to get good at. Right? I was calling C-level executives, usually well before 8:30 a.m. and after about 6 o'clock, so that I could get around the gatekeepers to reach these people who would usually show up early or stay late. And I started making phone calls to anyone I could find that might have anything to do with sports nutrition, whether they were packagers, contract manufacturers who were then very hard to find, magazine editors who might be able to point me in the right direction, and eventually connected with the president of a company who was answering the phone at 7 p.m. or something like that, who introduced me to everyone necessary to actually produce and manufacture a safe product. And that included biochemists who could be contracted at $80 to $100 an hour to ensure that the ingredients, for instance, would be on the generally recognized as safe list or the GRAS list. And I badgered and guilted all of my coworkers into committing to buy at least 1 month's supply of this product so that I could afford a first month's manufacturing, and took off from there. And so then when I found myself on Cobra with no salary, but a couple of months of, for all intents and purposes, severance and health insurance, I knew exactly what I was going to do full time.
How did you know that Brain Quicken, which was this substance, was any good? Or and not a fraud?
No, it's a great question. And I think the supplement or dietary supplement, nutraceutical industry or industries have a bad reputation for very good reasons. A lot of it is fly-by-night operations. There's a lot of bad science. There is a handful of good science. So I knew it worked first and foremost because the constituent components or ingredients, I tested it on myself after combing through things like PubMed. So there were very specific mechanisms of action that had been investigated under placebo-controlled, peer-reviewed studies, looking at things like vinpocetine or vinca minor, huperzine A, which is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. And I'd done a lot of the guinea pig testing on myself and then verified with people far more qualified to ensure that there wouldn't be contraindications between them. I do think a drug is a drug is a drug in so much as if you put something in your body, whether it's food through your mouth, an intravenous injection, or otherwise, if it elicits a biochemical change or a response, it's a drug. So I do think that supplements, even stuff you can buy at GNC, can be far more powerful and therefore dangerous than even some prescription medication, so you have to be smart about it. But I tested it on myself, looked at the literature, and then hired people far more qualified than myself to ensure that I was on the right track.
But this is supposed to make you not only smarter, but stronger.
Well,
so did you measure your smartness?
I did measure reaction speed. So I'd done a number of tests. We'll come back to this probably. I'm actually funding studies at UCSF in California right now related to cognitive function. But I'd volunteered as a lab subject at Princeton in Green Hall, I guess it was, doing these horribly boring tests like TOVA tests. They're so boring. But they're necessary and easy to administer for a lot of these tests. So I did look at before and after IQ, which is surprisingly easy to game as a side note, especially if you use mnemonic devices. I also looked at reaction speed. But the reason that it went from Brain Quicken, which was horribly unsuccessful, by the way, because it turns out that Americans don't really want to be smarter, the inflection point for the commercial success of that product was when I stopped ignoring feedback from students. Students who are NCAA athletes who would email and say, yeah, I can study more effectively and that's great, whatever, but my high jump has improved. My max bench press that I test through football has improved. My sprint times are down. What's going on? And I was like, that's great. That's really very quaint story. Now back to my tunnel-like focus on something that isn't working. And eventually I was like, you know what? The plausible mechanism of action, including the effects on acetylcholine, which is now being, I have a lot of connections to professional athletes now, is now being exploited for a lot of runners you may know, anecdotally at least for people from countries like Jamaica, is optimizing acetylcholine, levels of acetylcholine for athletic performance. So I shifted the focus to, as opposed to get more done in less time and improve your memory, to this is a non-stimulant-based pre-workout product that can affect the nervous system in a very non-invasive way. And that's when it took off, when I actually started listening to my customers. Imagine that.
When you told me you were going to write a book,
Oh, yeah.
I sort of rolled my eyes. He's always talking about these big ideas. And then the 4-hour Workweek was published.
I know, imagine.
And we know what's in the book, those of us who've read it and loved it. But talk about the job of an author writing a book for the first time. And what's a day like, or how do you get it all done?
I don't wish it upon my worst enemies. No, I would say that as a preface to that, never planned on being a writer, ever. My senior thesis just about killed me, for those who don't know. I went on a 5-year plan just to get the damn thing done. And I vowed to myself when I graduated that I would never write anything longer than an email ever again, which clearly has not worked out as intended. But I did take a few classes that gave me a huge amount of respect for the craft of writing. One of the classes, your class has had a huge impact on my entire life, and I won't turn it into a tearful thing for me because it's sort of emotional given that for a lot of things, but had a huge impact on my life. And another class that also had a huge impact on my life was John McPhee's writing seminar. It's which really gave me the structure I thought I would never use again, and then used for the 4-hour Workweek, imagine. The process of writing, at least my process of writing, has evolved over time. And before I wrote the 4-hour Workweek, I interviewed, because this is what I do, for my own out of my own interest, somewhere between a half dozen and a dozen best-selling authors to find out what they did that worked and what they did that was a waste of time. And I also interviewed, basically just begging and pleading for 15 minutes over coffee or whatnot, half a dozen to a dozen best-selling authors best writing authors, like Pulitzer Prize winners and whatnot, Booker Prize winners. And there was absolutely no consensus among the best writing authors, which I found very frustrating. And when I tried methods that worked for other people, like waking up first thing in the morning and sitting in front of a blank piece of paper until 6 p.m. every day, which some people do, I wanted to Hemingway myself within 2 days. It didn't work. So my process, I'll cover the tools first because my approach has become, I'd like to think, a little more organized. I use a number of tools. Evernote is one. I've used it for years. Full disclosure, I am an advisor to that company now, but I use Evernote for all of my research and gathering. So I will pull things off the internet to read later into Evernote. I will scan documents into Evernote. I will take photographs of pages that I've highlighted elsewhere and put it into Evernote. I then use Basecamp to organize how I interact with any members of a team. Those could be people from a publisher. Those could be freelance designers. Those could be, in the case of the 4-Hour Chef, an entire squadron of recipe testers at different elevations and different humidity points around the United States, as well as dozens of cartoonists, illustrators, photographers, and so forth. So Basecamp, which is made by 37 Signals, is something that I use for that project management. And then I use Dropbox for large files, sharing of large files and collaboration. In terms of the actual process and my routine, during book deadline, my routine does not vary very much. It's very codified because I find that I burn too much energy on minutia if I don't have a lot of set routines. For me, this is what it looks like. I wake up first thing in the morning. I set on the kettle. It's an electronic kettle for tea. So as the water is getting to a boil, I then make protein shake with protein and something called Athletic Greens, which is a greens product, more for immune system support than anything else. Then I sit down and I meditate for 3 to 5 minutes listening to one music track. I learned that from an entrepreneur named Kamal Ravikant. So I'm leaning against a wall, sitting on a cushion. It's comfortable. And you can listen to any track. I listen to We're Gonna Party Like It's 1999 by Prince, because it's really hard to be in a bad mood or take yourself terribly seriously when you're listening to that song. Then I get up and make my tea, usually pu'er tea, which is Chinese tea that's highly caffeinated and tastes somewhat like barnyard clippings. And I sit down to do at least, this is during book deadline, a half hour to an hour of work offline. So I will have either spec'd something out the night before, the day before, or I will have printed something out the day before. And then the afternoon, the rest of the day up until about 11 p.m. is my unproductive time. So I can't do any synthesis worth anything during that time. So I will do interviews, I will do research, a lot of grunt work, gathering, hunting and gathering. Then I will usually exercise at night when my pain threshold is the highest, because I've tested that kind of stuff. So I'll exercise almost always between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. Then I'll have dinner. Then I'll go home, relax for an hour or two, because I've had a stressful day of being unproductive. Then, and only then, will I get typically a bottle of Malbec wine, and I'll brew yerba mate tea, partially because that's what I did when writing the first book. Yerba mate has 3 different stimulants in it with 3 different pharmacokinetic profiles. It's pretty cool stuff, worth checking out. And I'll have 1 or 2 glasses of red wine as I get warmed up to synthesize, looking at all these different notes and disparate sources of whatnot. And then, hopefully, fingers crossed, if I hit a groove, I'll write until I can't write anymore. And usually what that means is I have music playing. I like Federico Aubele, who's an Argentine musician. I'll make a channel out of that on Pandora. And I will also, this is really, perhaps seems odd, I will play a movie in the background on repeat so that I don't feel totally isolated as a writer. Because writing is isolating enough. It's really lonely work, and I think you can get trapped in your head like Jack Nicholson pretty easily. So I'll put on a movie so that it seems like people are in the room with me, but it's muted. And I've done that with Casino Royale. I've seen all of these hundreds of times. Casino Royale, Jason Bourne. So far, so good. You see the theme, right? All right. Shaun of the Dead. Good movie, different genre. Here's the outlier, Babe, the movie Babe. And I got into Babe because it was the first highlighted movie on Amazon Prime free streaming on the Roku box. And I was like, oh, whatever, Babe. And then I clicked on it. I was like, this is such a good movie. And so, yeah, so Christmas means carnage. I know every line and every scene of every one of those movies. So I'll typically write, if I hit a groove, until 4 a.m., 5 a.m., and then crash, and then rinse and repeat. And I'll wake up as late as needed. Could be 11, could be 12, could be 1.
Okay, so the book's written.
Yes.
How do you make it a bestseller?
Oh. We could be here for days. But I'll give the abridged version. The short version is you focus on being, when you write the book, extremely specific in who you're writing to. The only way, I threw out the first 4 chapters I drafted or so for the 4-hour work week, not once, but twice. The first time I wrote it, all due respect to people from Princeton, I sounded just too Princetonian. It was like big words and sounding so smart, and it was just unreadable. So I threw it out. And then I was like, oh, that's too Princetonian. I need to be funny. I need to be really clever. So then it ended up sounding like the Three Stooges, which is even worse. So I threw that out. And then I decided, I'm going to have 2 glasses of wine and write the first chapter as if I'm writing it to my 2 best friends who have these problems that I have figured out. And so I wrote it for 2 of my close friends, one an entrepreneur, one trapped in investment banking. When you then go to market the book, nothing wrong with investment banking, God bless you, but he was not well suited to that profession. So when it came to marketing, I followed the general approach of Kevin Kelly, the founding editor of Wired, who has written a wonderful piece online, I recommend it all the time, called 1,000 True Fans. And my belief was that, number one, if everyone's your customer, no one's your customer. So if you're marketing to everyone, not only does it give you no direction, it's extremely expensive. Like, sure, if you want to take out full-page ads in People magazine, be my guest. You're going to run out of budget pretty quickly. Likewise, if you're trying to reach everyone, your message is going to be so vanilla that you will get indifference instead of having anyone excited or offended by it. So my approach to that, based on the best-selling author interviews, was that radio and blogs sold books. Specifically within radio, it was NPR, which still is true. If you want to sell books and you get on Marketplace or Fresh Air, you're going to sell a lot of books. Blogs, but radio is becoming less relevant while blogs were becoming more relevant. So I took it upon myself to try to figure out blogs. And I did that in person by going to South by Southwest in 2007 and went up to moderators of panels that I found interesting, and I would just give them a very short spiel saying, my name is Tim Ferriss, I don't know anything about tech, I'm here to learn, I'm friends with this one person who managed to chaperone me here, and these are the things I'm interested in outside of work. Is there anyone here you think I'd get along with? Like, is there anyone you would suggest I talk to, buy a glass of wine or something like that? And I did that for every moderator that held a panel I enjoyed. So I ended up meeting a really interesting group of folks who not only became my friends in many cases, but who were able to help with the book promotion if they believed in it. And I never said, what's your address? I want to send you an advanced copy to review. I never said that. What I said was, if an hour into drinking and talking, they still seemed interested, I would say, I don't think anyone's going to like the whole book, but there are 1 or 2 chapters, about 20 pages, I think you'd really like. My publisher has a bunch of advanced copies. If you'd like me to send you a copy, I'm happy to send you one. And if they were still interested, then I would send them a copy. And my philosophy also was, as it developed over that conference, I don't want to be a traffic bigot and focus on only the highest traffic blogs, because they're often comprised of many, many authors, and they're the hardest to reach because everyone's pitching them. I wanted to focus on single author blogs with, let's say, 50 to 500,000 unique readers who had a very intimate personal relationship with their readers, who were also thought of as thought leaders in their respective fields, which turns out really easy to do, especially if you meet them in person. And then I crossed my fingers, and I did a lot of hustling, but it was the blogs, absolutely the people I met at South by Southwest who put the book on the bestseller list.
Now, wasn't it also helpful to send some of your friends to bookstores and buy books by the hundreds?
Oh, yeah, I know. You can do all sorts of stuff. So what I wanted to do, no, this is a good story. So and this isn't, let me take a step back. So I heard a rumor, because no one knows how the New York Times works, except for the people of the New York Times. Turns out it's not a bestseller list. It is editor's picks list. If you compare, let's say, BookScan and New York Times, they do not correlate properly, as they should. So, like, what's the magical algorithm for the New York Times? I had no idea, but I heard a rumor, which was like from a friend of a friend of a friend. They're like, you know what? The San Francisco Chronicle list is prophetic for the New York Times. So if you see and I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you can drive book sales through the books that report to the Chronicle list, you have a good shot of hitting then the New York Times list. Okay, how do I figure out which bookstores there are? It's where they hold the events. Wherever they hold the events, that's where the bookstores are that report to the San Francisco Chronicle. And I was like, okay. Well, I wanted to sample, I wanted to give out books at events, for instance. And I was going to do that with hundreds of copies anyway, which does not translate to the bestseller list. But I was like, it should be that less volume is required at the San Francisco Chronicle level than at the New York Times level. So let me see if I can parlay that. So I had friends of mine who were involved in the tech community go out and buy books at these various places. I bought a bunch myself to distribute at events, which turned out to be a hugely smart thing to do. So for instance, just flashing forward, 4 Hour Chef, I gave away a copy of the 4 Hour Chef to every attendee of the Crunchies, which is a big awards show held by TechCrunch in San Francisco. That's a good investment of promotional copies. It didn't work. It didn't work. None of it translated. Is the punchline with the San Francisco Chronicle. None of it translated at all. And there was a lot of big PR that also didn't seem to translate. New York Times, Pickup, Cover the Style section, you name it. You get a lot of pats on the back from your parents, and your friends will send you text messages congratulating you. But in terms of moving books with outlets, it came down to NPR specifically with radio and blogs. To this day, I still stick with that for the most part. And Dr. Oz if you can get like 20 minutes on it, which I did once.
As a result of coming to speak to my class one year, you met a gentleman by the name of Ed Cook,
Yeah.
who specializes in memory and memorizing and has a company
Yeah.
in that field. Talk about Ed and what he does and the company and what it does and your relationship with the company.
I have an informal relationship with Ed at this point. Ed Cook is a grandmaster of memory. That is not something he made up. It's not something he put on his business card just to flirt with girls or anything like that. He is able to perform some absolutely jaw-dropping feats of memory, and it's all trained. One of them, which is considered the crowning achievement of memory competitors, is memorizing a shuffled deck of cards. And Memrise, MEMRISE, is a for-profit startup that is intended to teach people how to use, on a larger scale, in a broader context, his techniques to memorize foreign language vocabulary and so on. It's a really cool site. I have a competing investment in a company called Duolingo, so I don't feel ethically, karmically good about having 2 competing companies within my portfolio. So Ed and I have a relationship because I met him while I was doing the 4 Hour Chef and wanted to include a piece on mnemonics and memorization, because the 4 Hour Chef is really about accelerated learning. That's what all my readers have asked me for years and years. And we put together a competition which would help his startup, but also I just like doing competitions because they're fun and they get people excited, which is a $10,000 memory competition. And it ended up becoming, at least according to Ed, who knows this stuff, the largest memory competition that's ever been held, because it was widespread and distributed. And they built custom software with a beautiful user interface. It's really incredible what they did in such a short period of time. They would enable anyone to train on the computer, just like you might play solitaire on a computer, to learn how to memorize a deck of cards using a combination of techniques, but in essence, you're associating each card with a specific person. And then you create images of those people performing actions with an object, and then you place them along a specific route or in a specific room. So it's a combination of a bunch of different mnemonics I won't bore you with right now, but the primary anchor technique is called the Loci Technique, after multiple of locus or locations, what Cicero used to use to memorize his debates for the Senate. And the upshot of this is we just announced a winner. I just put her on my blog yesterday. 24-year-old Ukrainian woman trained for 5 days using the software. And you can tell if someone's cheating or not by, number one, knowing everyone who competes, which Ed does. Number two, by looking at their training records, and you can determine if it's been falsified. And so she successfully demonstrated memorizing and then recalling, or memorizing a shuffled deck of cards in 60 seconds. To put that in perspective, the American record for trained, I believe that the current American record for doing that among trained memory athletes is well over a minute. And it was just using better algorithm. If you think of an algorithm as a recipe, something that can be repeated step by step by step, they created something that's extremely beautiful that's never been done before, which is teaching people to do this online. So she won $10,000 and she got a job offer from Memrise. So it's a win-win-win-win all around.
You've made a big impact on the lives of a lot of people through your work and your books, but you're also involved in philanthropic activities, and you might share with us what you're focused on in that regard.
I always thought I was going to be a teacher. Specifically thought I was going to teach ninth grade in some fashion, because I think that's a really critical sort of inflection point where people can go in the wrong direction or the right direction. By many turns of chance and good fortune, I've ended up teaching, but just using the books and my blog, which now has about 1.2 million uniques a month, which gives me a great platform. So I've ended up becoming mostly involved with education in various capacities. Donors Choose, which is based in New York City. It's an incredible nonprofit focused on improving public school education in the US, where anyone can go online and donate money to specific classroom projects where they might not have pencils or pens. Maybe they've never had a field trip. They've grown like crazy. The founder and CEO is actually my former wrestling partner from high school, Charles Best. Their public supporters include people like, didn't start this way. He started off teaching in the Bronx. Now he has as public supporters Stephen Colbert, who's on the board, Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama, not bad to have any, talking about you during speeches. And they were the first nonprofit. I've been an advisor to them for 3 or 4 years, at least 4 years now. The first nonprofit put on the Fast Company 50 most creative companies in the world list, or innovative companies in the world list. That's one. Another in the educational space, Room to Read. So we've built probably half a dozen to a dozen libraries and schools in the developing world through John Wood, who wrote a wonderful book called Leaving Microsoft to Change the World. Great book, if you haven't read it. And then I've also done, I'm an advisor to Vitana.org, which is effectively, for those of you who understand the comparison, Kiva microloans for education in the third world. So those are a few of the places where I've focused. I'm also on the board of something called Music for Relief, which is disaster relief. But most of my nonprofit and philanthropic work, and they don't have to be nonprofit, as a side note. There are a lot of socially conscious companies that have some type of giving back involved or integrated into a for-profit model, which I'm also very involved with. Most of it has revolved around education. Just because I know without certain opportunities that I've had in education, certain mentors that I've had in education, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be where I am. So I want to provide people with some of those same opportunities and forms of mentorship.
My final question before we open it up is, what's next for Tim Ferriss? Do you have some new projects in mind?
The 4-hour nap. I think I'm going to put the 4-hour moniker to rest for a bit. Naming things, using names that sound like infomercials, very successful, it works. For what it's worth, it was actually sold, the first book, I'll come back to that, but the first book was sold as Drug Dealing for Fun and Profit, which was a tongue-in-cheek reference to the sports nutrition. Turns out that I think it was Walmart really just did not like that title. So I had to choose another one. I used Google AdWords and actually created a campaign to test titles and subtitles, where I bid on key terms like world travel, retirement, et cetera, and then I had the titles as the ad headline, subtitles as the ad text, and looked at the click-through rates at the end of a week or two. And what you ended up seeing was 4-Hour Workweek because it won the testing. In terms of what's next, I think there's a very good chance I'll do some experiments on television. I've put it off for a really long time. Had a lot of ridiculous conversations with a lot of ridiculous people about it. But I do think that if I'm going to do something using that broadcast medium as a teaching tool, I mean, this wouldn't be Tim Ferriss making over the Real Housewives of Orange County or something. It would really have a higher sort of PBS-esque aspect to it. I really should do it now. I feel like while I have some physical risk-taking ability, which I'd like to incorporate into it just for fun. A few other things I'd like to do, one of which is actually acquiring intellectual property, meaning specifically print, digital, and audio rights for books that are fantastic, that have not received the acclaim and the exposure that I think they deserve. So in doing research for all of my books, I've come across many, many wonderful books that are out of print or that languished because for lack of publisher support or author wherewithal with marketing, which is, quite frankly, should not be their job, but it is. And I have this platform, a methodology, partnerships with amazing companies like BitTorrent, which gets 170 million unique, well, they have access to 170 million unique users per month, where I can effectively plug and play. If I find a book that I love, especially in digital and audio format, but also in print, I can sell more than almost any publisher on the planet that I'm aware of with a pretty turnkey approach. So I haven't yet done that, but I'm very interested in helping extremely high quality books get greater visibility. We'll see. I think that's enough for now. But if anybody's interested in that, you can go to the contact page on my blog and send me a note. If you have an out-of-print book that's amazing, I'd like to know about it.
I have many more questions, but there are people here who have questions for you. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Tim, and
Okay.
you take it from here on your own.
All right, great. Yeah, if we have any questions, I'm happy to take them, and I'll repeat the questions for the audience.
Hi, thanks for coming. I was wondering, have you found the moniker like 4 hours with your 3 books to be limiting to like the sort of things that you can talk about? And then like going along with that, have you how have you responded to, obviously there have been a lot of people who are like, that's not a thing, you can't do that because you're really sort of changing things up, saying you can work for only 4 hours a week and still make a valid living, or you can get ripped by only working out 4 hours a week, that sort of thing. So like, how do you respond to that?
Okay, so there's a few different questions. The question is, do I find the 4-hour moniker limiting? How do I respond to critics? I'll paraphrase this, but how do I respond to critics who say, it's impossible, you can't do anything in 4 hours a week, or I don't believe you, 4-hour body, 4-hour working out 4 hours a week. It's actually 4 hours a month, believe it. Even more ridiculous. That's BS, I don't believe it. How do I respond? The first answer is I usually don't respond. Because you have to understand on the internet, in this neighborhood known as the internet, if you choose to engage in that fight, your adversary, you have to assume, is someone with infinite time. And they have far less to lose than you do, both in terms of opportunity cost and otherwise. So generally my policy with that, and there's constructive criticism and then there are trolls. And then there are hack journalists, and then there are good journalists, right? And I've encountered all of them en masse. So with constructive criticism, I'll engage, and I do that a lot. With trolls, my policy is starve them of oxygen. And that is the best approach, because if you link to them, people will write incendiary things about me hoping that I respond, because it'll drive more traffic. So the best policy is not to respond. I wrote an entire piece on like 7 principles for dealing with haters or something like that, that outlines my general sort of Google self-defense approach. With hack journalists, always answer questions via email. See what they've written. If there's a good dose of snark in what they write, keep it to email. You will always be misquoted otherwise. But my response to questions about the assertions that I make in, let's say, the 4-hour body are, show me your data. Show me your data and I'll show you mine. Mine's right here. I worked with Ray Croni's former researcher at NASA to look at the thermodynamics of the human body and the calories in, calories out model, which is fundamentally flawed in the following ways. Like, what do you have? Like here's longitudinal data with 30 subjects. Like, they need to have a leg to stand on with data. Otherwise, I'm not interested. But if they pick out something, they're like, hey, don't you mean micrograms instead of milligrams, and wouldn't this make more sense? Sure, I'll take a close look at that. For the most part, I find that people who say, for instance, the 4-hour workweek specifically, they clearly haven't read the book. For instance, people who have read the book include people like Mark Andreessen, right? Andreessen Horowitz, pretty competent entrepreneur who's had several billion-dollar-plus exits. He does not work 4 hours a week. But if you read the book, you realize that it's about increasing your per-hour output as much as possible. What you choose to do once you've improved your output 5 to 10x is up to you. You can cut back, you can keep going, you can add more. And so I would say only respond to sort of credible, constructive criticism unless absolutely necessary in an emergency scenario. If you get misquoted in a big publication, take them to task. That's where having a blog with 1 million readers is really helpful. I have a big stick to whack back with. But that's my general policy. But if people put up posts on almost any site other than my own, I never read the comments. Just a policy, don't read the comments. Put something on YouTube. Put up a video of your baby playing with a kitten on YouTube and watch the comments. You'll have like Hitler and Nazis by 2 pages down. How did we get here? How did we get here? So anyway, long answer to a short question, but that's something that a lot of people contend with, so I wanted to answer. Other questions? Let's go up to the top here.
Hi, Jay.
Yep.
Thanks for coming. I'm Eddie. So I'm just wondering, since Brain Quicken has been like a good source of income to you, and if you're working just 4 hours a week, why did you decide to sell it?
Yeah, I can tell you. So if my first company, the question is, was a good source of income and was requiring minimal time, why did I sell it? I sold the company in 2009. I sold the company because for a few reasons. Number one, I wasn't learning anything, and I was bored by it. That's not reason enough, though. That was a contributing factor. The main reason was I found that even if I wasn't spending a lot of time on it, it was like, how many people here have used antivirus software? Okay. Have you ever been on your computer and you're like, why is my computer so slow? And you're like, oh, it's Norton antivirus eating up all my background. That's how it felt. I wasn't spending a lot of time on it, but it was always occupying this part of my brain, this extremely important RAM that I wanted to apply to other things. And those were the main reasons. And that's how I apply startups and other things as well. If I have equity in a startup, but let's say it's run its course, and I'm just investing for free. In some cases, I might suggest that I give it back. I signed an advisory agreement with a startup. They expected to have their minimally viable product ready at a certain time. It wasn't ready for 2 or 3 months, and I went to the lead VC, and I was like, should I just give them back their equity? Because I'm just not really doing anything right now. I can't do anything. He's like, no, it's fine. But it's because I value my CPUs more than I value sort of the incremental income that it would give me. Yeah, of course. Let's go here.
2 questions. What can a Princeton undergraduate do to best prepare themselves for a career in entrepreneurship? Number 2, as a fellow Fortesian, for our safety, which room did you conduct your experiments in?
All right, so 2 questions. What can undergrad best do to prepare for entrepreneurship? Number 2, which room did I have at Forbes? I'll answer them in reverse order. I don't remember my room. It's actually a pretty nice room.
Main and annex.
It was Maine. It was Maine.
Main. Which floor?
Second floor.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah. It was all safe. I did, CSI Ferriss and cleaned it up. There's nothing to be worried about. No contamination, no radioisotopes. I loved Forbes. The annex less so. I felt like I was in a minimum security prison when I ended up in the annex the next year. I was like, really? This is my second year? You should at least have done this first. So I ended up in the main building. In any case, way too much chocolate milk had at the Wawa. In terms of preparing for entrepreneurship, I would say two things. Practice, get good at negotiation and deal making. So read books like Secrets of Power Negotiating, get it in audio if you can. Getting Past No is another good book on negotiating. And practice. So do things that provide a risk of rejection, like volunteering with an organization here to get 6 or 7 speakers to come in, like working with a startup and volunteering, not trying to avoid being on the phone, cold calling CEOs and CTOs and whatnot.
What about course of study?
Course of study? Course of study would be take this class, read about the negotiation, and then volunteer or intern or work at a startup of, I would say, let's just call it 15 to 50 people, where you can be in the room. Doesn't matter if you're serving coffee. Be in the room when high-level deal makers, and keep in mind, high level could mean they're 23 and that happen to be the CEO, making deals, facing objections, overcoming objections. I really think entrepreneurship to me is like emprender. It's like to undertake. It's more about creating something from nothing than starting your own business, right? So you're going to be applied in many different contexts. And I would just say that learning to improvise and respond to pushback is the skill, overarching every other. Communication, got to get good at writing, good at speaking. So On Writing Well by Zinsner would be another book that I'd recommend. Get good at email. Read pitch letters. You might want to volunteer at a VC just to see their pitch letters and decks and stuff. That'd be my, and you can find that online as well. Okay, other questions?
The writing program you use, is that K-Edit?
The writing program I use, I did leave out one tool. I'm glad you reminded me. The writing program I use for putting together my books is absolutely not Word. Oh, can I tell you how much work I've lost when you have 600 pages with track changes from 4 people on it? Scrivener is the program that I use. So there's a program called Scrivener, developed by a software engineer or software developer out of the UK, that is very often used by people who, screenwriters and playwrights. I happen to use it for my books because you can do a split pane and look at your research as you're writing in a separate document, as well as call up all of your documents from within that one program. So I use Scrivener, and I really enjoy it. I'll continue to use it.
The K-Edit, did you learn about that in McPhee's course, or were you using it before?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The K-Edit, did you learn about that in McPhee's class, or you took it, or were you using that before?
I'm not sure what you mean by K-Edit, but so I didn't learn about it from McPhee's program. What Professor McPhee taught me was how to structure writing, how to think of the beginning, middle, end, how to think about how you tie, how you get past crafting good sentences and get to the point where you're crafting good articles and books, which is far more valuable than the tools themselves because the tools change, but those are principles that can flexibly be applied to just about everything. There are lots of really good programs out there for writing, but I like Scrivener. I've grown accustomed to it. And it can be exported to Word as well. Anyone else?
Yeah, you mentioned you connected with some C-level people. How did you connect with Dr. Oz? Did he connect with you? How's that relationship?
All right, so Dr. Oz. How did I connect with Dr. Oz? Probably not the most replicable example, just because this is actually quite amusing. All right, so Daphne Oz went to Princeton.
Yeah.
And I went to TED Med at one point and randomly ended up sitting out at the sort of cafeteria-style seating next to Daphne and her mom. She's like, oh, I went to Princeton. I'm thinking about doing dancing. And I was like, oh, well, you should do tango. You should totally do tango. Like I could give you some pointers. And she's like, oh, can you give me a quick lesson? I was like, sure. So I gave her like a quick tango lesson, this, that, and the other thing. Never put the dots together that she was Oz of Dr. Oz. So she's just like, okay, great, tango lesson. Yeah, great, okay, have fun, bye. That was it. And then at some point, I guess I've always hired independent publicists to work alongside my publishers. I just do not want to leave things to chance. Publishers work on a lot of books at the same time. And whether it's from my publisher or my independent publicist, we sent a note. This is also a great workaround, by the way, to get on TV. A lot of TV personalities have radio programs, so aim for radio first. So I ended up on the Dr. Oz radio show on Sirius, I think it is. And I show up, and it's Mrs. Oz. And I'm like, oh, hey, whoa, and then had my epiphany, like these Oz's are one and the same. And I don't think it was purely a favor for any reason like that, but my name had probably already floated around. And I prepared really hard for that interview, and I nailed it. And we were supposed to go something like 30 minutes, and we went an hour instead. And then did the first show, and which was incredible. I mean, if you own like 15, 20 minutes on Dr. Oz, it'll move the needle. And I, again, took it really seriously and prepared and made sure that I had a lot of really good material, spent a ton of time with their producers, did a good job, and then that's how I got the second time. Did a good job on the second time, then I get a third time, and so on and so forth. But I have a piece on my blog that's worth checking out, which is, I think, from like getting media from local media to Dr. Oz. If you search on my blog, which is just 4hourblog.com, of course, FOURHOURBLOG.com, then you can find this. If you just search Dr. Oz. But I also replicate, or I should say, have included query letters, actual letters that I sent to, say, the deputy editor of Wired magazine to get a 4 to 6 page spread. And you can look at exactly how I approached it. Let's go here.
So this is about you in Japan.
Okay.
Last April, I was in Tokyo, and you landed there, and I saw on Twitter you were more excited than ever.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is that, what's your obsession?
Yeah.
Secondly, what are some of the lessons that you have seen from the Japanese culture applied to your life or learning process?
So this is a question about Japan. Why am I obsessed with Japan? What have I learned from Japanese culture that I've applied elsewhere? This is easy. This is softball. All right, so because it's awesome, number one. No, Japan, I think, is incredible. It's such a weird place, but I love it because I'm a pretty weird guy. I went there as an exchange student from 15 to 16. It was my first real trip abroad. So going from Long Island to Tokyo, from Long Island to New Hampshire to Tokyo, and living with a Japanese family, going to a Japanese school, where I was the only one who looked like this, just blew my brain and gave me just a really deep affinity for the Japanese people. Because I didn't find all of the stereotypes that you hear often about the Japanese, xenophobic, they'll never help you, they'll never like this, they're inscrutable, Japanese. I just thought none of that stuff was true when you actually spoke some of the language. None of it. Maybe that changes when you're older, it might, but not for me. Hasn't ever been different. And what I took away from Japan, I took a lot of things away from Japan. Number one, it reinforced my obsession with organization and cleanliness. So if my friends really want to bug me, for instance, I'll have, when I sit down to work, I'll have books and dictionaries or whatever, and they'll all be perfectly parallel. So they'll just go, right, and move one 20 degrees. When I'm out of the room, and I'll come in and I'll fix it. And one of my friends said, Tim, that's American Psycho. You realize you're American Psycho. And I was like, so it reinforced all those tendencies, which I found very comforting. The focus on minimalism in many respects is something that has deeply affected me. Multifunctionality. Simplifying. Zen Rock Garden kind of says it all. So I've also taken a lot from their martial traditions. There's a fantastic novel called Musashi. I think it's sold more than 100 million copies in Japanese, which is unbelievable. But it's about the most famous swordsman of all time. in Japan at least, named Miyamoto Musashi, who also wrote the Book of Five Rings, the actual historical character. So Musashi, it's long, but it's amazing, which has a lot in common with Stoic philosophy. So I have borrowed a lot of the philosophical tenets of Buddhism as reflected in the martial traditions. And then I would say, lastly, attention to detail and just incredible work ethic, which might sound odd coming from someone who wrote a book called The 4-Hour Workweek. But if anyone here has seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi, like that, okay, everyone here has to see the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It'll blow your mind. So amazing. It's about the only, I guess, what's the highest Michelin star? 3, 4? The highest Michelin star restaurant that is located in a subway station. It's like 8 to 12 seats. Sushi. No, we don't do appetizers. No, you can't change the menu. No, it's so awesome. It's great. And just the attention to detail and dedication to that craft is something I have a huge amount of respect for. So those are all things that make me want to go back to Japan. And it's just weird. It's like a weird place where you're always safe and it's really clean. So I'm like, well, it's not to like. That's the short answer. Let's go right here. I'll come back over. Yep.
Typically, what stage are the startups that you're advising, and what are you focusing on when you advise them?
So the startups, what stage of the startups I invest in, what do I focus on when I help them or invest in them?
Help.
Okay. I have invested in or advised companies that have not yet raised their seed rounds of funding. So for instance, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Uber, but I was an advisor to Uber. Yeah, I was an advisor to Uber before they ever raised money. Partially, actually largely because I was an advisor to StumbleUpon, and I came in really late to StumbleUpon after they bought the company back from eBay, which is so cool. It's such an awesome story. It's like, oh, we sold it once, might as well sell it twice. Yeah, we'll buy it back. Garrett Camp, who I know very well, then wanted me to become involved with Uber. And then we worked really well together, so I became involved with Blackjet. And so I tend to run with a couple of people who know what I do well. But Evernote I got involved with quite late, so they were already taking off. Nothing like they are now, but that was 3 or 4 years ago, so quite late stage for them. Yeah, quite late stage for them. But they wanted specific things that I could bring to the table. In this particular case with Evernote, my focus on productivity overlapped very nicely with the PR and marketing that they wanted to do, which historically they had not done. So, which I think is smart. They had focused on putting every extra dollar into product development. And if it's an earlier stage, for instance, there's a company called Taskrabbit. Taskrabbit used to be Run My Errand. I met Leah, the CEO, who's awesome, when she was at Facebook Fund. So had not raised funding, was bootstrapping, based only in a couple zip codes in Boston. And we rebranded it as Taskrabbit. I syndicated that round, basically. I didn't get anything out of it other than the introductions. And with like 2 emails, forget about 6 months of fundraising, it was like 2 or 3 emails, you're done. You just raised $1 million. Congratulations. Now get back to work. And helped her also with the city-by-city scaling, because I was already seeing that in a few other companies like Uber and some others. So I always start based on spending 7 figures on split testing and direct response advertising through my own sports nutrition company. Having done all of that myself down to the most micro level, I always start with usually this is consumer-facing web products, almost always. Focus on improving all of their conversion points. So homepage to most valuable click, sign-up flow to completion of sign-up flow, free user to paid user, or cross-selling to pro accounts, things like that. And only once that mousetrap is refined, then I'll focus with them on a very pragmatic, sequenced marketing PR strategy. In many cases, the pitfalls and things not to do being just as important. So you see a lot of Y Combinator companies, for instance, awesome companies, they get media at the wrong time. They get the New York Times at demo day when they're not ready to capitalize on that. The New York Times isn't going to cover them again, unless you happen to be an Airbnb, but I wouldn't cross your fingers for that. That tends to be what I focus on. I'm doing a lot more helping with fundraising these days, just because it's easy, pretty easy for me to do. So up to kind of 5 to 10 million. I'm pretty good at just sending emails to a bunch of people who trust me and getting it done if I'm putting my name behind something. Yeah, cool. Other question?
Thank you. You talked mostly about offline marketing. I'm curious what you do to build a following online. You said 1.2 million uniques a month. Or does one just follow the other and lead to the other? Or are there other things you do online that you would recommend?
They do. The question is, what have I done online to build an audience? Roughly paraphrased. I try to batch promotional activities together so that there is a lot of overlap and sort of cross-pollination. So if I'm doing a lot of offline promotion, I want to make sure there's an online target that I can direct people to, which is what I did with the blog initially. I'll give you a few recommendations, but I wrote an extensive piece called How to Build a High-Traffic Blog Without Killing Yourself, which goes really meticulously into this, and I think it includes a 60-minute presentation that I did at a tech conference. The basic idea is that I do not focus on timely content. I focus on evergreen content that is definitive. So there's a post, one of the most recent posts on my blog, I think it's 2 posts ago rather. It's on how a first-time author got a 7-figure advance. And it is, I think, more than 8,000 words. It's a substantive piece. And I know that that will get traffic 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So I'm investing in real estate almost, if that makes sense from a Google perspective, rather than trying to get page views for something that's timely. Because you can't, as I said to someone recently, you can't out Fox News, right? You're not going to out TechCrunch. So focus on something that other people are not doing, which is creating evergreen content that can be referred to for years and years and years. If I stopped blogging today, which is not true for news sites, if I never put up another blog post, I would bet that I would still have probably 700,000 plus unique visitors a month a year from now, just because of the backlist, the existing content. That's been my focus. And also doing guest posts in the beginning, guest posts for other sites that will then drive people to you once you've established credibility, much like someone might be a correspondent on The Daily Show and then split off and do their own thing. So you can build up that credibility and audience and fan base on someone else's media property and then translate that to your own media property. Those would be a few thoughts. The book, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, is a really short read, 120 pages. I tend to follow most of the principles in that as well. Yeah. Other questions? Let's go. Apologize if I'm not getting people who've had their hands up a while. I'm trying my best. I'll keep going. I can also speak at the reception if we run out of time here. Let's go here.
Thanks, Tim. Given that you really seem plugged in 24/7, how did the whole technology detox idea come into play, and how did it actually go for you? And more importantly, how did you find basically plugging back in after the whole backlog?
Yeah, technology, man. Who needs it? Email, what a headache that turned into. Anyway, I am plugged in very selectively. So just to talk about that first, I rely on my readership. This is a huge value of my readership. I'm very fortunate that by luck or by design, or maybe a bit of both, I've ended up with a very smart, for the most part, smart and well-educated readership. What that means is, if I use my readers, or I should say they volunteer it, they want this, as scouts. So if I see 3 or 4 readers say, dude, just use Evernote, which is what happened, I'd be like, hey, what's the best tool you found for this? And Evernote kept on popping up. That's how I got in touch with Phil Libin of Evernote. Here we are. Shopify, same story. And like on and on and on. Arguably some of my best, or maybe my best investments. In terms of unplugging, I'm not sure this is what you're referring to, but I just very recently took 4 weeks completely unplugged in Indonesia. So I was in Bali, no phone, except for a local phone for texting my language teacher. No phone, no computer, no internet, no calendar for 4 weeks. And that's harder to do now than it has ever been before, right? For me, there's more inbound than ever before. Found it great, honestly. As long as you recognize you have to be comfortable, I think, letting lots of small bad things happen in order to get the big good things done. If you want to prevent every possible problem from occurring, you will never leave. You will never unplug. Because guess what? Of the 100 people who might expect you to respond instantaneously to email, assuming, say, 5 are important and the other 95 are just impatient, of course they're all impatient, but someone out of those 95 is going to be offended that you had the gall to take a vacation. It's just the way it is. And there were no major catastrophes by taking 4 weeks off. And when I got back and I had this, God knows how many thousands of emails, I put in my autoresponder, I made it really clear, if you need to get a hold of me, here's how you can get a hold of me for an emergency. But I'm going to be archiving every single email that I get between this point and this point. If it's relevant, send it again. And I did that. Archived it, gone. Great, $1 Fantastic. And were there a couple of headaches? Were there a couple of like insurance policies that I was late renewing, and then I had to pay a penalty and so forth? Did my car get towed? Yes. So it was reported as abandoned by a neighbor. Oh, I love you, neighbor. And on and on and on. Were there a few things that maybe totaled up to like $500 to $1,000 of cost? Yeah. Did I save thousands of dollars just by not being in San Francisco and being in Bali? Yeah. Did I get like massages every day for $10 an hour? Yeah. I'd consider that a good trade. So the re-entry was a little rough, just in so much. It wasn't the email and stuff that made it rough, though. It was coming back to San Francisco and having like crazy homeless people yelling at me and like just buses honking and like muni drivers trying to kill me and all of that. I felt like Crocodile Dundee. I was like climbing up a pole and looking around, and that was really just sensory overload for a few days, but otherwise it was fine.
Tim, I'm glad you re-entered.
Yeah.
And also that you came here to Princeton
I
to
love
share
it.
your thoughts, and thank you for the thoughts that you shared.
Princeton University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.